Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our second Clinicians' Choice webinar. I must say we're delighted in the registrations. We have doctors from Alberton all the way to Windhoek. So a warm welcome to our dentists that have joined us in Namibia and also to our dentists in Swaziland that have joined us this evening. Welcome. I don't know if it was the catchphrase of our poster that went out with regards to how can we save you 30% of your impression material costs over an annual period. But our registration has been phenomenal. We have full house tonight, and we probably will need to do a repeat if need be. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Peter. Peter is the International Sales Manager at Clinicians' Choice, or should I say for Clinicians' Choice, based in Canada. He has a wealth of experience, 35 years in the industry, traveled to more than 70 countries around the world, training everyone from key opinion leaders to dental assistants. So without further ado, Peter, it's over to you.
Thank you, Sharon. And again, good evening and welcome, and appreciate the opportunity to share with you something that can help reduce your impression material cost by up to 30% a year. So I'm just going to switch into a PowerPoint, and then I'm going to switch over to a live camera just to kind of demonstrate the product to you. So without further ado, okay, can everybody see my screen, Sharon?
Yes, we can.
All righty, here we go. Okay, so when we look at the impression trays typically used in dentistry, primarily people are using traditional plastic stock trays. But the challenge with traditional plastic stock trays is they're elastic. And the challenge with anything that is elastic is it has memory. So certainly stainless steel trays were a step in the right direction to prevent distortion from taking place in impression taking. However, the challenge with traditional stock trays, be they plastic or be they metal, is they are large, medium, and small. And when we look at the oral anatomy, it's not large, medium, or small. It is square, Gothic, and round. So especially in clinical situations where we have mandibular tori, exostosis, or a patient presents with malpositioned teeth, in many cases, a special tray is required to be fabricated. And with special trays, either you're having your lab do it for you or you're doing it yourself. You've got your powder liquid, you're drilling holes in the little tray for additional retention. And all this does is it costs you additional money and it takes time. And we know more now than ever how valuable time is for you. So what we've developed is a tray called a heatwave customizable impression tray. So what's unique about these trays is they are manufactured from a thermoplastic acrylic material called biopools. So this is a very, very rigid tray, which is going to provide you the stability you require to take distortion-free impressions. But what's unique about these trays is they are anatomical in shape, meaning that when you seat this tray in the mouth, not only do you get optimal dynamic pressure around the arch upon insertion, but as a result, you reduce the impression space, the potential for distortion, but most importantly, you are going to reduce the amount of impression material you use by up to 30%. Now, the nice thing about these trays as well is all the upper trays come with a closed distal wall, meaning that there's going to be less issues with material flowing down the back of the patient's throat and inducing the gag reflex. Additionally, with these trays is they can be customized chairside by placing them in hot water at 70 degrees Celsius. Obviously, we don't want to go too hot, So what we would recommend typically is you place water in a suitable container, place it in a microwave for about 45 seconds. And then what this gives you the ability to do is self-customize these trays chairside. Now, these are designed for single use, but folks, we've been selling these for a number of years here in North America. People tend to cold soak them. We do recommend that you use them with some sort of tray adhesive and simply remove the tray adhesive either with a orange solvent or something like alcohol, but they can certainly be cold soaked and reused. Obviously, you cannot place them in any sort of heat sterilization because then the dimension of these trays will change. Additionally, unlike stock trays where typically you have 10 upper sizes and 8 lower sizes, you only need 4 upper sizes and 4 lower sizes. So the upper sizes are all the orange or the salmon color, if you will, and then the lower sizes are the yellow color. So the benefit for you as well is it requires less inventory space in your dental office. So we have 2 types of kit configurations available. This kit that we have here in front of us would be our little mini intro kit where you're getting basically a little measuring caliper, and I'll explain you momentarily how we use that, along with a little measuring chart, because all the trays are numbered according to size, and then 4 upper trays and 4 lower trays. We also have a larger kit which has 32 trays, so 4 of each size plus the little laminated measuring chart and the little caliper, if you will. The caliper is fully autoclavable, and I'm going to show you how to use this in just a second here. So here we've got a patient that presents with mandibular tori. So what we do is we place the caliper. If we're measuring to the lowers, we measure to the lingual of the first molar. Now the benefit of the measuring caliper is then you place it on the measuring chart, is what it eliminates for you is the need to go to the mouth with multiple trays, which you would have to then re-sterilize. For the uppers, we would just turn those little levers to the opposite side, and they would measure to the buccal of the first molar for upper trays. Then what you're going to do is you're going to select the appropriate tray, put it in the hot water for about 35 to 40 seconds, and what this now does, it gives you the ability to self-customize the tray chairside. You would then try the tray in. If you were satisfied, you'd run that tray under cold water for about 5 seconds just to assume the rigidity, and then apply your tray adhesive, and then go ahead and take your impression. But what you'll notice is when you've taken your impression, how there's no interference with the oral hard tissues. Now, we're also going to just touch a little bit about impression material. You know, the challenge with a lot of impression materials in the industry is they're all filler dependent. So many times when you look at the impression after you've taken it, is you see that most of the light body is over displaced and it's only in the margin. And folks, that is not a good situation. And I'll tell you why. Is because typically with your light body materials, you get between 3 to 7 microns of accuracy. Whereas with your putty tray materials, you only get between 45 to 55 microns of accuracy. And people say to me, well, so what? Well, now you send that impression to the lab pours up the stone model, and to get your crown to seat properly, they will add coats of dye spacer. And every time they're adding a coat of dye spacer, they're adding another 8 to 10 microns of film thickness, and they might add for you 4 or 5 coats. Well, the research shows that optimum seating of a crown occurs when no more than 40 microns of space exists between the preparation and the restoration. Why? Well, all permanent cements are only between 2 and 20 microns thick. So when you go beyond 40 microns, the sealing and the adhesive capabilities of your permanent cements get compromised. So hence the reason why it is so important that your entire preparation is captured in light body material. And we can certainly do a webinar similar to this at a later stage where we focus on impression materials and the importance of having technique-driven viscosity options. So anyway, Then we also have the indirect application in which these trays can be used. So, again, patient presents with mandibular tori. What you can do is take a big old orthodontic tray, take an alginate impression, pour up a stone model, and then on that stone model, with a little measuring caliper, measure to the lingual of the first molar. For the lowers, for the uppers, you go to the buccal of the first molar, and then place this little measurement guide on the chart. Pick the appropriate size of tray. Now you can see when I seat the tray on the model, it's not adapting very well at all. So then by simply placing this in hot water, you can now give you the ability to manipulate this tray. Now, if you're not satisfied with this tray after you've manipulated, what you can do is put it back into the hot water and it'll go back to its original shape. And if you don't believe me, I'm going to demonstrate it to you in a few moments. But you can do that about 6 or 7 times with the tray before it'll start losing its memory. Then run it under cold water once you're satisfied and go in and take your impression. You can see there's no interference with the hard or soft tissue, if you will. So I'm just going to move forward in the best interest of time here. I'm going to talk a little bit about our other impression trays that we have in our portfolio. We know that probably 80% of indirect restorations are single units. And, what would the rationale be for using a dual arch impression technique? Well, the first benefit is accuracy. And what I mean by that is you get your bite, you get your posing, and you get your impression in the same material. Because typically, if you're taking a full arch impression, you're using either a polyether or a polyvinyl, or maybe for some of the dentists out there, they still use hydrocolloid. But then you'd use maybe a vinyl for a bite. And then for your posing model, you typically would take an alginate impression. And we all know that alginate is never going to be as accurate as vinyl or polyether. So many times you can end up with a little bit of an open bite situation, or you have open contacts, is because that vinyl bite registration will not seat properly on an alginate derived model, because the alginate is never going to be as accurate as a vinyl material. So the benefit of this is it's all-in-one impression. The other benefit is it's easier for the patient. Why? Because there's less tray, there's less material, and especially with the patients with a restricted bite, there's less propensity for them to gag. And there's also a profitability benefit for you as well, because there's less time required to take the impression as opposed to taking 3 separate impressions, and there's less material use, so it's going to be more profitable for you as well. Now, it's important, there's the following successes are important to ensure that you get an accurate impression, and number 1 is the tray must be rigid. If there's one thing I can share with you this evening, folks, is that plastic is elastic. It deforms, and we all know that distortion is invisible. And you get your crown that comes back from the lab, and it's either like a rooster wearing socks, or you have to adjust the inside of the crown to get it to seat properly. And according to the research, 78% of the time, the fault is not that of the technician, but of the clinician, and it's either the tray and or the impression material that might have been used. The challenge with plastic trays is they cannot prevent distortion. And then also the tray needs to accommodate all arch forms. So there are clinical situations where you cannot use a dual arch tray. So for argument's sake, if a patient has, it's just eluded me for a moment, but if you're missing any teeth, or if you've got any bilateral units, then you would always need to take a full arch impression. And it's also very important that the tray and the material work together. So this impression material that you see here is the only material in the industry that has been designed specifically for use in a quadrant tray. It's our material called Affinity Inflex. We Because typically if you're using a quadrant tray, the tray material you should be using should have a straining compression, a relevant stiffness of less than 2%. Inflex is the only material in the industry that has a straining compression of 1.3% because you need a material that's going to provide the support and support the walls of a tray to prevent distortion, if you will. So some of the technique challenges that you will face is, number one, you need to have profound hemostasis. You cannot be working in the presence of saliva or blood to record an accurate impression. Number two is we need to remove all the contaminants from the preparation site. So, we do sell a product called a pre-impression cleansing gel, because typically with just your air water spray, it's very difficult to remove contaminants. So you need a mild acid, and Detail is a 10% EDTA formulation. And what it allows you to do is allows you to remove the contaminants, but leaves the smear plugs intact, so you don't induce sensitivity with the cementation of your final restoration. The other important thing in impression taking is the communication between the doctor and the patient. So you can clearly see in this image here, the patient has clenched too hard, and there's virtually no occlusal anatomy here for the laboratory to work with. So again, communication with the patient and the clinician is very, very important, because when they're closing, you just want them closing into occlusion. You don't want them clenching. You don't want any pressure on what we refer to as the masseter muscles. And so, we all know that if you have to remake a crown, based on research that was done by 3M here in the United States, it costs about $713 in time, materials, and money to replace or redo crowns. And typically for a laboratory, they have to make an additional 20 crowns to recuperate that cost. So when we look at the research that has been done on these aluminum trays of ours, I'm not going to read this to you because you folks can read this yourself, but we know 80% of teeth are stored by dentists are single units, and it's just better, it's more in your favor to use a tray that is going to prevent distortion. So a aluminum tray. This was done by Gordon Christensen, who's kind of the godfather of dentistry. This was also very interesting. Using an impression material that's specifically designed to be used with the dual arch tray, researchers observed 12 times the accuracy in the maximal cuspal position with the dual arch cast, because typically for the seating of a crown, it shouldn't be taking you more than 8 minutes with an x-ray to verify that that crown is seated correctly. And we know that many folks will book anything from a half an hour to 45 minutes for a crown seat. And as we all know, time is your biggest expense. Besides your staff and your building, time is your biggest expense. But the challenge with plastic trays is they're just not able to resist deformation. So even if a metal tray is a little bit more expensive than a plastic tray, if you think if you're actually spending 10 to 15 minutes to do adjustments when you're cementing your crowns, what is that 15 minutes of time worth to you? And I'm sure it's a lot more than the difference between a metal and a plastic tray. So just something to bear in mind. So as I said, the challenge with plastic trays is as soon as you bite down, we all know that the tray materials that we use are are designed to be more rigid. So what it does is it just causes that tray to deform. Then we also have trays that have very, very high sidewalls, which can interfere with the oral hard tissue. And now you have a compromised impression. Or some of these plastic trays, their arch width is very, very narrow. So, you can see here in this slide, there's no margin. It's very, very difficult for the lab to produce an accurate prosthesis when it's very difficult to read the margin in this restoration. And then, as I say, all plastic trays have memory. So what they'll do is they will rebound, and now you have a distorted impression. And what this leads to is it leads to the need to do either occlusal and interproximal adjustments. So typically interproximal adjustments are a result of using plastic trays. Occlusal adjustments are typically required because of the impression material that one might have used. So what we developed for quadrant impressions is the Quadra Extreme. This is the #1 quadrant selling tray in North America. It's manufactured from aluminum, so it's a very, very rigid construction to help prevent distortion. And then we made it with a number of other very, very unique features, being we made it with a wide arch so as to accommodate people that maybe have malaligned teeth, but the tray is customizable, meaning that you can make it a little wider, you can make it a little narrower, you can adjust it, but once you've adjusted the tray, it's not going anywhere. It's not going to move because it has no memory. Then we've made the sidewalls lower on purpose. The reason why we did that is it helps to prevent any palatal impingement or axial roll of the tray wall to help prevent distortion. And then the distal bar is 25% thinner and it's tapered so as to prevent any impingement in the retromolar pad area. Then we put 2 retention bars, both on the buccal and lingual sidewalls, so that the impression becomes part of the tray. It forms a secure lock to prevent distortion. So what you would do is you would run a bead of your tray material around the outside of the tray, and then for the tray, obviously the side that you're taking the impression on, you want to put a little bit more additional impression material in the tray. Then we also made it with a shorter lingual wall, so especially in the anterior part of the tray, so as to prevent impingement in people with smaller mouths, if you will. And then the mesh is attached to all 3 sides of the tray, so as to prevent any of the material leaching out, but it also helps the material to flow around that distal wall to form a secure lock, if you will. So just looking at the clinical application, so here we've got a crown that's ready for impression to be taken. So here's this material I was referring to earlier, called Detail, 10% EDTA, ethylene diamine tetraacetic acid. Now, we wouldn't recommend that you use your chelating or lubricating agent, which is 17 or 18%, because that acid is too aggressive and it would remove the smear plugs. And we don't want to remove the smear plugs. We just want to clean the surface because we don't want to induce sensitivity when we cement that permanent restoration. So lightly scour the preparation site. They come with these little tips with the little gauze on, for about 7 to 10 seconds. And what it does is not only leaves that preparation site squeaky clean, but it also lowers the surface tension to allow that impression material to more intimately contact that preparation site for a more detailed and accurate impression. Then, just as a clinical tip, when you're using your light body materials, sometimes when you remove your impression, you see a bubble right on the margin, which can be very frustrating. So what we recommend you do, you start on the margin of the restoration with your light body, and you don't finish on the margin of the restoration with your light body material. You always want to go around in a clockwise direction and just making sure that you completely cover the surface of the preparation site. And then, as I say, at the same time, you have your assistant loading the tray, but loading the outside of the tray first, and then loading the inside of the tray, and then placing it into the oral cavity, and then just having the patient closing into occlusion. So we don't want any pressure here on the masseter muscle. So what we recommend you can do is just put your hands on the cheek of the patient, and as soon as you clench, you'll feel that those masseter muscles will bulge out. So we just want them just closing into occlusion. Then when we remove the tray, we always recommend you just hold your hand right up against the cheek, have the patient open the opposing arch first, and then with your fingers, just go in there and gently rock the tray out. But what you'll notice with our material is how all the light body stays in the preparation site. And the reason why we were able to do that is we incorporated resin into our impression material, meaning that the fluid states between our different viscosities are matched. And as a result, the more rigid tray material will never ever over displace the more fluid light body material. And as a result, you get a far more highly accurate impression, if you will. And, you know, as I say, crown seats shouldn't be taking you more than 8 to 10 minutes. And then just in closing, before I switch cameras, is even with your temporary restorations, you know, temporaries, typically people don't bill the patient for temporary restoration. So time is really very important. And, you know, we've developed two very, very nice trays for temporary fabrication. We have a posterior tray and then our anterior temp tray. And I'm going to better explain these to you when I switch cameras here. So just bear with me while I switch cameras. Okay. Okay, so can everybody see the screen? Sharon, can everybody see the screen?
Yes, Peter.
Okay. So this is the heat wave tray. So as I said, this is an anatomically designed tray. So you'll notice when I put it on the model here how easily it adapts, and there's just so little impression space. So this is where you save that 30%, folks, is because when you seat this tray in mouth, as I say, it gives you that superior dynamic pressure around the arch upon insertion. And as a result, you reduce the impression space, the potential for distortion, but most importantly, the amount of impression material you're going to use by up to 30%. Then what you'll also notice is that how this distal wall is closed. So that's going to prevent material flowing out the back of the patient's throat and inducing the gag reflex. So I've just got some hot water here. So as I say, if you've got that patient that comes in and presents with mandibular tori, exostosis, or malpositioned teeth, what you're going to do is you're going to take that tray, and I'm just showing you that I'm not cheating. I'm just going to put it in hot water here for about 45 seconds or thereabouts. And then what this will do, it'll give me the ability to self-customize this tray chairside. You know, one of the challenges of the trays that you can take a torch to is they can generate quite a bit of heat and make it very uncomfortable for the patient and the soft tissue. Whereas with this, as I say, the water is 70 degrees Celsius, so it is not boiling water. And then, as I say, I can take this tray and now I can self-customize a chairside. Now, once I've customized it, what I want to do is try the tray in. If I'm satisfied, I'm just going to put it in cold water. I've just got a bowl of cold water here for about 5 seconds. And what you'll notice is how this tray now has gone back to its original rigidity, which we want when we take impressions. But if I'm not satisfied, I'm just going to put this tray back in the hot water, and you'll see here very quickly how this tray will go back to its original shape. Also, additionally, what I'm going to show you is just how to measure for the trays. And I say you can adjust these trays probably 5 to 6 times before they will start losing their memory. But now you can see that tray has gone back to its original shape. So what we're going to do is, as I say, when we measure, for the uppers, these little measuring calipers, you'd measure to the buccal of the first molar, and then for the lowers, you would measure to just turn those little calipers around, and you'd measure to the lingual of the first molar, and then you'd place it on the measuring chart, and then you would have picked the appropriate size tray. So here we would know we would need a size 53, and then all the trays, the number is actually on the tray. Let me just see if I can zoom in here. But right over there, sorry, the light's just a little bad here, but the number of the tray is on right over there, if you will. Then, this is the challenge with traditional plastic trays, folks, is they all have memory. Okay? It doesn't matter where you get them from. is they all have memory. So as soon as you put the tray in the mouth, when the patient bites down, the tray does that. And as soon as you take the tray out of the mouth, the tray does that. And now you have a distorted impression. So some of the manufacturers brought out these little metal trays, but when you look at the shape of this tray, it's not anatomically shaped. And the issue with this mesh is this just slides out. So the challenge that is you're going to have all this impression material flowing out the back of the tray here. There's not much in the way of retention on this, and this is a very, very flimsy handle. So when we look at the quad tray, as I said, this is an aluminum tray. I can customize this tray, and it's not going to move. So I can, I can adjust the angle. I can make it a little wider, a little narrower. You can see how low the sidewalls are. So we really call this not a tray, but rather a platform. And then how we would just, as I say, run that heavy body around the outside of the tray first so that it forms that secure lock so as to prevent distortion. And then we also have an extra long tray. So this is if you wanted to maybe take impression for 2 or 3 units maximum. The benefit of this tray is we made it with a tapered buckle sidewall. So with retention slots, so to give you a little bit of additional tension, but it also assists the lab by providing them with more information and recording cuspid rise. So this is the extra long tray. This pretty much goes from the midline all the way back, but this is the most popular selling tray. We also do have an anterior tray, but I'm going to be honest with you, we've had some manufacturing issues with that. So we just developed prototypes for a new anterior tray that we hope to have out sort of by the end of the year. And then finally, just looking at the little trays for temporary restorations, this is that little temp tray. So we purposely made it a perforated tray so as to help to stabilize the matrix material. And this can go in any quadrant, either upper or lower. Now, for argument's sake, if we were doing a second molar, all we would do to prevent any impingement, we would just fold that little arm out of the way and the other side at about a 45-degree angle so as to facilitate easy placement and or removal of the tray. And then about a year ago, we developed our anterior tray. Now, what's really nice about this tray is we put a little slot down the center, so we can make it a little wider for the upper arch. And then for the lower arch, we can make it a little narrower to put on the lower arch. But if we've got patients that present with mandibular tori, the nice thing about this is you can fold these lingual walls back and you'll be able to seat the tray very easily. And that's about as mean as I'm going to treat you this evening. I don't know if there's any questions, Sharon. I'll be happy to entertain those.
Hi, Peter. No questions have been posted as yet in the chat. If you do have any questions, to just type them in so we can address them for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. While doctors are thinking of questions, but I think you've covered everything in detail there, Peter. Just to let sorry.
Go ahead.
No, just to let all the delegates know that the product information flyer, as well as the promotional pricing for tonight, will be emailed to you. But to give you an idea, you're looking at the Heatwave intro kit, which is 32 trays. So it's basically 4 of each size with your caliper and your chart. That is selling for 2,304 Rand. You then have your mini intro kit, which is 8 trays. It's 1 of each size with your caliper and your chart. And that's retailing at 996 Rand 47 cents. Your temporary trial kit, which is 50 anteriors and 50 posteriors, is 996 Rand. And then your quad trays, they retail at 1,500 Rand, both anterior and posterior. But we will be emailing this to all, and your Teddy sales and your sales representatives will be following up with you as well. So again, Peter, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
I know
there was a
it's-
question, I think there was a question. I think there was a question about the temp trays and whether they're disposable. I would say we would recommend them single use. The issue is that if you adjust the trays, there's a little areas here where they're connected. Those tend to get weak and they can break off. So again, you know, we leave it up to your discretion, but we recommend them to be single use. And as I say, the cost between the tray compared to a plastic tray is not significantly different, folks. You know, if you think about the time you spend having to do adjustments, that's what's really eating into your profitability. I see there was a question here from Dr. John Nolan about the non-perforated tray and retention. So in these heatwave trays, you'll see there's a little bit of retention in the upper part of the tray, but we do recommend, even if you're taking an alginate impression, that you do use them with a tray adhesive. So whether it's the upper or the lower tray, as I say, there is some retention slots in the upper part of the tray, but we do recommend you just put a little bit of tray adhesive in there just to make sure that we got all the bases covered. Oh, another question, can the trays be purchased individually? Yes. Obviously, we would recommend that you start up with a little intro kit, but the refills of the trays can be purchased individually in packs of 10. So a good question.
I think that's it.
Okay. Well, that's
Peter, thanks again.
You're very welcome.
Great, and to the thank you for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Cheers, everyone.